crises will result in a concentration of control. Klaus Schwab gave a quote. He says, if the past 500 years in Europe and America have taught us anything, it is that in times of acute crises, there is a boosting of the power of the state. And so this understanding that the most common form of government in world history is kings, power concentrated into the hands of the state. Democracies and republics are attempts to take the power of a king and give it to the people. But what if the king wants the power back? Does he just ask for it? No. So there's two methods. One is fear. When people get afraid and they're in a crisis, they will panic and be willing to give up their freedoms to somebody promising to restore order. And the second is free stuff. When the people get dependent on the free stuff, they incrementally will give up their freedom to continue the free stuff. Sort of like a drug dealer takes over a neighborhood two ways. He can come in with guns and get everybody in fear, and they submit to the mob in exchange for being left alive. Or the drug dealer is so nice, he's giving away free drugs until you get hooked. And then you want some more free drugs, you're going to have to incrementally give up your freedom and sell yourself into prostitution. So this is the scenario. It's a creating or capitalizing on crises to consolidate control. And there's biblical examples of this. You know, when the Hebrew Republic period, when Israel was being invaded, they all go to Jephthah. And they say, look, you and your sons reign over us. You be the king. Just deliver us from this guy. So there's a crisis. And in the crisis, these Israelites are going to surrender to somebody. And they did the same thing with Gideon. They said, you know, Gideon, you and your sons reign over us. And to Gideon's credit, he said, the Lord is your king. So he resisted that. But the idea is that you can take advantage of a crisis, or you can create the crises. So the default setting for human government is kings, or a king is just a glorified gang leader. So tomorrow, if we woke up and there's no police, what would happen? Well, for a couple of days, it would be fine. And then people would start robbing stores. And when word got out that you could just walk in and walk out with stuff, then the stores are going to be empty. What happens next? Well, then people are going to start robbing houses. And then you and I are going to start forming our neighborhood into a little defensive group to protect our neighborhood. And we're going to basically form our own gang. And there's one amongst us that's going to be a little bit better at knowing how to organize and fight. And we'll all say, hey, you be our captain. And then we wouldn't want people to snitch. So we would demand loyalty. And before you know it, we're back to gangs. And they'll start getting bigger and bigger, and we'll be aligning. But basically, that's the default setting for human government is kings. What we've experienced in America is rare, where you can take the power of the king and give it to the people. It would be chaos unless everybody's taught the law and everybody's personally accountable to God to follow the law. And so that's where in colonial New England, they got this idea from Israel, the first 400 years out of Egypt. This is one of the interesting things that I've taught on, is that King Saul is the dividing point of this change in government. Prior to King Saul, you have a 400-year period from around 1400 BC to 1000 BC, where you have Israel with 2.5 million people and no king. And it worked because every citizen was taught the law, and every citizen was personally accountable to God to follow the law. But after a while, the priests stopped teaching the law. And here's Eli, the high priest. His own sons are sleeping with women in the very tent where the Ark of the Covenant is. And then there's another Levite with a silver graven image in the house of a guy named Micah. And you're like reading the stories thinking, what's this Levite doing with a graven image? Isn't that one of the commandments? You're not supposed to have them. And then there's a story of a Levite with a concubine. The law says the Levite's to marry a virgin of his own tribe, and then they're traveling, and they're in a house surrounded by sodomites. Something about that behavior that appears at the last stages of a people ruling themselves is casting off the self-restraint. And so in this chaos, this lawlessness, the children of Israel go to Samuel the prophet, and they say, this self-government system's not working anymore. We want a king. And Samuel cries, and the Lord tells Samuel, they did not reject you, they rejected me. Right? right? So God's original plan for Israel was to not have a king, have everybody be taught the law and everybody accountable to God to follow it. And this is what the Puritans and the Pilgrims and the separatists looked to as the perfect model of God's original plan. The King of England looked to the King Saul and on period as the anointed king, and so they called it the divine right of kings. And so we had the Puritans, right, and their congregational model of government that eventually turned into the English Commonwealth. Matter of fact, England had an America experiment for around 10, 12 years. It's called the English Commonwealth, from around 1445 to 1645 to 1660. So but so England had a short America experiment, but in America we continued it, but it's fragile right now. There's an interesting study that was done by J.D. Unwin. He was an Oxford anthropologist and wrote a book in 1934 called Sex and Culture. And he studied 80 major civilizations over 5,000 years, and he saw trends. And one of the trends that he saw was sexual promiscuity always precedes the collapse of a civilization. And so we talked about ancient Israel and how they had this immorality, and then their form of government collapsed, and they ended up getting a king. But we look at Athens and the Babylonians and so forth. The J.D. Unwin said that civilizations would go through 4 stages. The first was a period of pain and poverty, war, famine, and they would get through it and they would work hard and become productive. And then they would work together and become patriotic. And then they would finally get prosperous. And then they would want to enjoy their prosperity, and they become promiscuous and indulgent and sexually immoral. And J.D. Unwin even called it's sort of like the way of an athlete. An athlete's young, he's disciplined, and he's focused, and he watches his diet, and he works hard, and he wants that prize of being a champ. And then he finally gets to be the champ, and he is the rules for a season or two, and then he gets a little lazy and doesn't exercise as much, and he turns into a couch potato. And he still in his mind thinks he's the tough guy. And then he gets challenged into the ring of competition and gets defeated. And the next guy ends up ruling for a while. And so that's the way the life cycle of a civilization is. At first, they work hard, they get through some famine, they get through some war, then they work together, become patriotic, and then they become prosperous, and then they enjoy their prosperity, get promiscuous. And J.D. Unwin, again, he's not a Christian per se, but he calls it a sexual marketplace. He said, where women as a whole say nothing happens unless there's a commitment, the guys make the commitment, and then they go out and work hard for their wife, and then the next thing is little kids appear. And the guy has another emotion called being protective. And when all the men of the country are productive and protective of their wives and their family, the whole country becomes productive and protective, right? Rising water floats all boats, and everybody's getting more innovative and creative and expansionistic and even militaristic. But when the women as a whole say there does not need to be commitment, water seeks its own level, and you have a bunch of guys saying, hey, pleasure time. They get selfish, and they get focused on their own, fulfillment and so forth, and there's fewer kids born to fill the ranks of the military. And when enough of the people of the country get sexually promiscuous, the country gets weakened, and they get conquered by the next rising civilization. And J.D. Unwin said that it's irreversible because human nature is on its side. Human nature wants the pleasure. And so when you take off the restraints and you let the water, out of the dikes and you let it flood, you can't close that back up again. And so the best we can do is to slow it down. People say, can we turn it around? I'm just worried about slowing it down. But what we're seeing is this exponential curve. Water goes down a drain slowly around the edges, and then it goes faster and faster and faster until it's sucked down the vortex. And you have these little bitty compromises on morals and values. In Hollywood, like the first time they ever used a curse word, in a movie, it was like a big deal. Or the first time that they showed a bedroom scene was a big deal, and but it had the man and the woman in, like, the Ward and June Cleaver. They were in separate beds wearing pajamas, but then they would be in the same bed. And each movie, each actor or actress would push the envelope a little bit, and they would be the star for a short time until another one would push the envelope a little more, and they would be the star for a short. They would think that they're the star because they're the star. No, they're pushing an agenda, and they get flattered because they're pushing their agenda. But then somebody else pushes it, and the like the J.K. Rowling that does the Harry Potter, that for a long time she was like pushing the envelope, on the different sort of redefining morals, and but then she even said, wait a second, I have a friend and who thinks there is really a male and a female, and all of a sudden she gets blackballed because it's a moving goalposts. And it's like they keep moving it, they keep pushing the envelope, and where's it going to go? I was thinking on this. Lust is never appeased by yielding to it. It always wants more. It's like an unquenchable fire. Well, what we're facing is a lust-driven agenda. They are never appeased by yielding to them. They want more, right? Originally it was going to be just them doing what they want in their bedroom. Remember, they pushed that, and it passed, and immediately they made a beeline for the preschool. And they began to teach these kids. Well, wait a second, if they would have ran saying, we want to teach the kids, it wouldn't have passed. But they ran by saying, it's just a respect for marriage thing. We just want to be able to have people do whatever they want. As soon as it passes, forget the marriage. They're going to make an immediate beeline to the preschool and begin indoctrinating these little kids. And then they not only want to indoctrinate your kids, they want to groom them for sexual exploitation. And then they want to chemically castrate them, and they want to have them remove their breasts, and they want to, and they want you to be happy when they're doing this to your kids. And they want to call you hateful if you're not happy. And they want to take away your kids. There's no appeasement to this agenda. It's lust is an unquenchable fire.
So here's the question then. Here's the question then, Bill. Have we reached the point in America where we are not a moral enough society to maintain liberty and freedom? We just saw Proposition 3 pass. On Election Day, reports CBS News, voters in at least 5 states saw ballot measures about abortion access. In Michigan, 55.8% of voters supported Proposition 3, also known as Prop 3, which protects abortion rights. What is Prop 3 and how does it amend Michigan's Constitution? It goes on from there. So the question is, with all that we see happening, and look, this drag queen Christmas would not be going to all of these cities if they didn't think they could fill up the seats. Now, maybe they won't fill up the seats. We'll see if we can track what the sales are, what the turnout's like. But my guess is they're going to get turnouts for this because we're seeing mothers drag their children to these drag queen shows. We are seeing drug use off the charts, alcoholism off the charts, suicide off the charts, pornographic addictions off the charts, violent crime off the charts, rape off the charts. Look at the crime rate, and maybe people could go back and look at the stats. And say, well, the numbers for rape aren't the highest they've ever been. I would have to assume, just guessing now, that sexual assaults and rapes are probably highest they've ever been, because I don't think you can pump people's heads full of all the violent, disgusting movies and all the access to violent, horrific things that are out there and not have this consequence. Look, we just saw, 3 or 4 young people in Idaho murdered. We just had a lady in Memphis this summer out jogging, grabbed, thrown in the car, murdered. This is nonstop. The point I'm asking, the point I'm making is, have we reached a point, Bill, where we cannot maintain a free society? Because didn't the founding fathers say something about a moral society? A constitution was written for a Christian and moral people.
Yeah, that's why I'm concerned those cities you mentioned, those drag queen story hours, what is the church's response?
Well,
Probably
let me just interrupt you.
nothing.
By the way, some of these are being held at so-called quote churches. We just talked about one in Katy, Texas, held at a quote church. And I put quotes around it because it's not a real church. But some of them are the drag queens. We have the videos of them doing this in so-called churches on Sunday, where the drag queen is delivering the sermon, if you will, and inviting the children up to the front. We've seen the videos of this. I put quotes around churches. These are not real churches, obviously, but this is what the culture sees as being, quote, churches. So when you say they're doing nothing, some of the so-called churches in America are participating in this. And I frankly don't know how the churches that say they're opposed to it can say anything about it, because most of them have promoted the most twisted scripture in the Bible. Judge not lest you be judged. Judge not lest you be judged. So how on earth can even so-called mainstream evangelical churches stand up to this when they have filled their congregants' heads with the idea that no one's to judge anybody anymore?
You know, in studying history, there were two waves of pastors that came into America that influenced the government. The first was Calvinist Puritans of the 1600s, and their attitude was God has a plan for your life, marriage, family, church, and government. Find out what the plan is, put it into place. 1700s, you had Lutheran pietists, and they sparked revivals, and they said that it's more than a plan. You have to have an experience with Jesus, and when you do, your life will change. And you won't do the worldly things you used to do, like go to bars, brothels, and lewd theater and get involved in government. And that's the origin of these churches today saying, well, I don't want to get involved in government because I'm holy. And so the question I have is Numbers chapter 30, silence equals consent. If you're not involved, you're silent, you're giving consent to those things. And Jesus says, if you allow one of these little ones that please me to stumble, better than a millstone around your neck and be thrown in the depths of the sea. The children are the battleground. They're the prize. Who gets to program them? Who gets to, and the Bible, in a sense, is a behavioral software program, right? It has morals. It has values. You do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That God made men and women, male and female, and that marriage is holy, and so forth. Well, they want to put their software on these kids' brains and teach them there's no right, there's no wrong. You can kill babies in the womb. You can feel like you're a girl today, boy. You can feel like a fuzzy. You can feel like a kitty. You can feel like anything that these kids are being taught. There's no borders. There's no guidelines. There's no right, wrong. And then you shove them out on the street, and they say, hey, well, there's somebody I want to kill. And they kill them. It's like, how can you get upset that they simply acted out what they were taught in the public school?